Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm Raj Panjabi, the U.S. Global Malaria Coordinator for the President's Malaria Initiative, but today I'm here in my capacity as a senior level champion for locally led development in USAID's Global Health Bureau. I couldn't be more excited about the conversation we're about to have. Today I have the pleasure of moderating a panel on the future of aid, and I'll get to speak with three very smart, very committed individuals who are pushing USAID to work more effectively with local partners and government counterparts to invest more in local partners directly. We in global health believe in pursuing a world where no patient is out of reach. And I believe that one of the biggest levers we have to create this world is proximity, the idea of investing in the people closest to those we serve. And we've seen the power of proximity at work all week during this local partners meeting, investing directly in local implementing partners, and how that's not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do. It actually helps deliver better on the health outcomes we're all pursuing. You've heard from Tele Bopele in Botswana about how they adapted during the COVID-19 pandemic to keep people on treatment, and from Pakacheri in Malawi, where they are preventing and responding to gender-based violence. You've also heard from partners like the Jamaica's AIDS Support for Life, Integrated Services for Health and Development in Ethiopia, and the Center for Health Solutions in Kenya, who, with long-term support from USAID, upgraded their organizational systems to be able to reach more people and save more lives. That is the power of proximity. Through your work every day, you all demonstrate the power of proximity, and I look forward to championing with others the experience you shared this week and working with Global Health and our locally led development working group, as well as others across the agency, to broaden what we can achieve when we work with local partners directly. So today, let's get to the conversation. I'm excited to have a conversation with Don Steinberg, former Deputy Administrator of USAID, who's now serving as the Administrator's Expert Advisor on Localization for the agency. You never quite retire from the agency here, and Don's thankfully retired from retiring from the agency, and we have him back on. Welcome, Don. We have Shambi Ellis, the South Africa Country Director for the long-standing USAID PEPFAR partner Mothers to Mothers, which is just doing phenomenal work on preventing mother-to-child transmission and strengthening health systems for HIV. We have Kimberly McLean, or goes by Kim, Senior Regional Director for the Americas at the Global Fund for Children, calling in from Washington, D.C. I recently had the opportunity to reflect on what I'm optimistic about for the future of aid during a conversation, Don and Shambi and Kim, that I had with Dagan Ali at the recent Siegel Family Foundation's annual summit. She's been a long-time activist and doer in champion for localization and aid and dignity. I'm hopeful. She asked me, what am I optimistic about for the future of aid? And what I said to her is that I'm hopeful that one of the biggest changes we're going to see is a shift in people's mindsets from donors asking, how can I invest in proximal leaders, partners, and health workers? How can I invest in those closest to the people we serve? How can I help make development more local? How can I make development more dignified? That to me, I see that question being more honestly asked and more honestly answered. When more people and organizations ask themselves that question, I imagine you share some of this view, we're going to see the beginning of a new chapter in the story, a chapter in the story in which diverse communities across the world will set their own agenda for change and for development with dignity. So I'd like to ask the same question Dagan posed to me, to each of you. What does the future of aid look like to you from your vantage point? And what do we need to do to support one another to achieve that future? I'll start with Don, then we'll go to Shambi, and then to Kim.
Well, thank you, Raj. Your timing for this question couldn't be better because, as you know, our administrator, Samantha Power, is actually, as we're speaking, laying out the priorities for USAID in a speech to Georgetown University. And she's highlighting some of our current challenges, what you might call the 4 C's: climate change through collective action for adaptation and remediation, COVID response and the use of assistance to build resilient health systems, crisis and conflict and the resulting population displacement, and the pernicious impact of corruption and poor governance. At the same time, as you know, we're celebrating our 60th anniversary of the establishment of USAID in November 1961. And I think it's useful to speak about 3 fundamental changes in our overall environment for development assistance. First, as you know, in 1961, the role of foreign development assistance was largely to provide capital for investment and to fill the savings gaps in newly independent countries. Assistance accounted for some 80 to 90% of capital flowing to these countries. Today, that official aid is dwarfed by business investment, by remittances, and even by private philanthropy. Our role now as a government agency must be to use our resources more selectively as catalysts, as public-private partners, as sponsors of pilots and new technologies, as agenda setters and conveners, and as investors in projects where only governments can assume the high-risk, high-reward initiative. Second, in 1961, our focus in bilateral assistance was on specific sectors: education, healthcare, food security, infrastructure, each of which was viewed in any particular context as the solution. Over time, I think we've come to understand the interplay between these efforts as reflected in our commitment to promote sustainable and resilient growth and eradicate extreme poverty through first the MDGs and more recently the Sustainable Development Goals. At AID, we need to put the SDGs back at the center of America's development efforts. We need to reaffirm our commitment to collective, time-bound, measurable goals. And once again, we have to speak a common language with our development partners. Finally, 60 years ago, as you suggested, donors pretty much had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted with their development assistance. We've witnessed over the decades what I've called the democratization of development, with country after country demanding ownership over their unique development drives under the watchwords, "Nothing about us without us." Along with localization, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit more later, the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion are being mainstreamed and integrated into all of our efforts. There's finally a recognition that sustainable growth and poverty eradication can't be achieved without empowering historically marginalized groups and drawing on their voices and their ground truth. And this includes women, people with disabilities, indigenous populations, the LGBT community, racial and religious minorities, and displaced people, and a recognition of the intersectionality between these identities groups. So I think I'll stop there, but those 3 changes are points I think we need to keep in the back of our minds as we continue this discussion.
Thank you, Don. Use funding catalytically, leverage the interplay between the various development efforts, put SDGs at the center of development, and nothing about us without us, drawing and putting local leaders at the center. Thank you for that. Shambi, over to you. What does the future of aid look like to you, and what do we need to do to support one another to achieve that future?
Great, thank you so much. And it's great to be part of such a great panel. As you know, Mothers to Mothers, also known as M2M, is an African-based non-governmental organization founded in 2001. So we're celebrating 20 years as we speak. And we believe in unlocking the power of women to eliminate pediatric HIV. So we have the perspective of working on the ground and really looking at what the future of aid looks like, probably from the top up. And from our vantage point, definitely it has to be community-centered and led. I think Dr. Steinberg has already said it. We really need to place the solutions within the communities that we're working and making sure that in the design and the delivery of our programs, our communities and our people are involved in that. The way our peer model works at M2M is that it really embeds itself in a community model, because we train and employ women in the communities that we're working in that are HIV positive, that have gone through these journeys, that have these experiences, that can share these experiences and become almost like a partner to our clients to be able to access health services and also education and support. These health services that extend to the children and also to the families. So really, because these women are sitting in these communities, they already know what the communities need. They already have a sense of what's expected, and they're respected within the community. So they can be that voice that Dr. Steinberg talks about. So how do we utilize these community cadres to be part of those health solutions? Secondly, it's about due diligence. You know, as development practitioners, we often have frameworks, plans, you name it, and we sort of are walking into countries with sort of a mapped out idea of what communities and countries need. Sometimes we just need to do a little bit of due diligence, some kind of analysis to get a sense of what do the communities need, what do the people need. I've often said, working in the health arena, that, you know, I'm here, I walk into a community, I want to talk about HIV testing, but the immediate need for that person is they need water, they need sanitation, they need food. HIV and health is the last thing on their mind. So how do we ensure that essentially that due diligence is done so that we really understand the holistic needs of that individual? So moving just from our scopes and our targets and our plans to what does this community need? And how do we ensure that we're working together with other donors to be able to provide those needs? In Tanzania, when we moved into Tanzania, we had an opportunity to do that due diligence when we were looking at providing TA to the Ministry of Health as well as another USAID implementing partner, where the USAID mission allowed us to do best practices and also landscape analysis around PMTCT partners that were already there. We don't need to come in with anything new. We need to look at what's already existing, what can we align, what can we improve, and then what can we enhance. So right now we have a great best practices document and landscape analysis that now speaks to areas of improvement to take it to the next level, so that when we integrate it into government, it's really looking at all the best practices that are on the ground. Public sector private partnerships, we wouldn't be where we are without them. To provide for those holistic needs, we may not be able to do it on our own. Our aid that we get from USAID may not be enough. We may need some supplemental income. How do we leverage those so that we're working together to be able to provide that to the communities we're working with? The existing resources, what do we have? Who are we working with as partners? Dreams was famous for this. They would say layering, 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 because they knew that they had a bevy of resources that they were integrating through all these partners who needed to work together to provide the holistic needs of an adolescent girl, young woman, or an adolescent boy. So really, how do we take advantage of those? We've had the privilege of working with the likes of Procter & Gamble through UNICEF. We've provided simple things like diapers, nappies. You're talking about sort of PMTCT outcomes. You're ensuring that this young woman links to services, but you're also giving them the ability to be able to provide for that child in another way through a private and public sector partnership. In Angola, it was ExxonMobil coming to the fore and saying, we want to be able to augment your PMTCT work within Angola. And this is the additional funding that we're going to be able to provide through the Angola mission. The future of aid has to look at responsiveness. COVID, who would have thought we would have been where we are right now? 23 months down the line, we're still dealing with it. It's a global reality. We weren't prepared for it, but our donors need to be able to shift and pivot quite quickly to provide that critical funding so that we can respond to global crises. In the context of M2M, it hit us quite hard. We were looking at closure of facilities, we're looking at interruption of services, we are looking staff and client infections, we are looking at mental health that we hadn't prepared for. And without the additional funding that we received from our donors, as well as USAID, we wouldn't have been able to do the work that we do to provide protection for our staff and ensure that we don't interrupt services. Most recently, we got additional funding from the American Rescue and Plan Act, ARPA, that allows us to continue the COVID work and help the national response in Angola. And then lastly, technology. Technology is going to be the thing that takes us to the next level. When we close those facilities, the mentor mothers needed to continue work. They had to do it virtually. So M2M was forced to leapfrog quite quickly and pivot and create e-service delivery platforms. We used our existing apps, WhatsApp, to be able to provide information, education, and we called it the virtual mentor mother platform, but also peer via phone, where the mentor mother is still connected with their clients. We use that to ensure that we don't have those interruptions in services. So I think if we didn't have the funding, again, from the Johnson & Johnson, from the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, we wouldn't have been able to move into the technology place and take it to scale. So in closing, the future of aid looks like community-centered and led, due diligence, private and public sector partnership responsiveness, and definitely investing in technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Shambi. Well said. You recapped it well, and it's striking to me how much resonance there is between the points Don just made about leverage, which I heard you speak about holism, about the sort of keeping sustainable development goals at the center, about public-private collaboration. You've added points around adaptation, technology. Thank you. And centering communities. I love the point you made about employing people closest to those we serve as the key center of the solution itself. And Mothers to Mothers doesn't just talk the talk, but walks the walk here. Let's turn over to you, Kimberly. What's the vision look like for you? What's the future of aid look like? How do we get there?
Thank you, Raj, and Dr. Steinberg, Shambi. I spent the first part of my career really deeply working with USAID programs and deep in an organization that was really committed to local partners as part of the delivery of aid. But I'm now outside of that world, and it's interesting now to reflect from the outside. And so I'll keep my comments short because I really believe that people who envision the future of aid should be the ones who are living it. And but when I think about the future of aid in a big sense, I think that the vision really should be one of solidarity, of mutual aid, but that also acknowledges the historic injustices of colonization, of resource extraction, of white supremacy, that really should humble those of us who are responsible for distributing resources. And distributing money particularly, because as Shambi said, there are so many resources out there and we often get tunnel vision around the money. Aid is frequently referred to as soft power, and I'd really like to see a future where the global South is really claiming and exercising their own soft power as the rightful counterbalance to that of the global North. Where aid really supports the equalizing of soft power at every level. So breaking down the hierarchies and the exploitative relationships that have marginalized people around the world. And for those of us in the global North who are charged with moving money for development, I really imagine a future where we recognize that this money was accumulated from a globally integrated economy with labor and resources from around the world, and therefore it's not just ours. I imagine a future where we don't fall victim to hubris and we actually respect our own limits. That is, the limits to what we actually can know or can understand from our own individual or even collective perspective in the global North, and that we respect the boundaries of others. That is, we don't seek to absorb and co-opt. We ask for consent, we welcome the no, and we pursue change by drawing people into collaboration in a way that's not coercive or divisively competitive either. So, I think the future of aid is Shambi.
Thank you, Kim. Your words remind me of Administrator Power's deep focus throughout her career on dignity as the central organizing concept, which I know is something that is infused when we think of our highest aspirations for the future of aid. And you mentioned solidarity as a key twin to dignity. Let's thank you for those reflections. I mean, I think what came out as well in what you all said is that these are big challenges. I mean, none of the vision that you put forward, the components of it can be implemented overnight, and it is in fact implemented every day. It's day by day we do this. But you've given us reasons to be optimistic that we can all work together to tackle these challenges. So let me turn to you, Don, and come back to you. The administrator asked you to come back to USAID as her expert advisor, focusing on localization. Your appointment, the administrator's recent comments in Congress, and here in the local partner meeting just yesterday, they all underscore the importance that USAID will be placing on the power of proximity, or what we call the localization agenda. Could you tell us a bit more, Don, about USAID's localization agenda? What are the high points, and why do we think this agenda will succeed? And Don, you're on mute, so.
I am indeed. Thank you for pointing that out. So let me begin by saying that I really endorse the comments that Kim just made. We have to recognize that there is a history of colonization and exploitation that needs to be redressed through mutual development policies on the ground. And the single lesson that I take from that, again, is that sustainable and resilient development means shifting leadership, ownership, decision-making, and implementation to local citizens and institutions who have the capability, the connectedness, and the credibility in their own communities to drive change. And make no mistake about it, the administrator is committed to a consistent, purposeful, and comprehensive strategy to provide more direct funding to local actors, to change the power dynamic among grassroots organizations and their foreign partners, and to reinforce a local systems approach to development. It's important, again, to bring the full expertise, the ground truth, the motivated self-interest, and the resilience of local partners, including government, business, and civil society, to address their legitimate demands for development and also equity and inclusion. So what does this look like? Building on our past efforts from USAID Forward under the Obama administration to the Journey to Self-Reliance under Administrator Mark Green, our administrator has outlined 4 lines of efforts. First, again, we will channel higher percentages of development and humanitarian assistance directly to and through local actors, while ensuring accountability, high standards of monitoring and evaluation, and the absence of diversion of funds. These efforts will build on the success of existing programs like the New Partnership Initiative, Local Works, Cash Transfer, greater openness to unsolicited proposals, and simplified procurement, bidding, and eligibility requirements. And today, the administrator has just announced a $300 million program to support local organizations in the countries of Central America that are impacted by severe climate change, as well as internal difficulties, all designed to address the challenges of irregular migration through the root causes approach. But secondly, we will help change the power dynamic among donors, implementing partners, the UN, the World Bank, and local actors. We will ensure that local actors serve not only as beneficiaries and sub-award implementers of projects, but that they will have an empowered voice in planning, designing, and evaluating projects. Through a co-creation strategy, we'll insist that local actors have a seat at the table, and preferably at the head of the table, throughout the life of our assistance programs. Third, we'll further embrace what is called a local systems approach, recognizing that all development in humanitarian assistance occurs within a unique national context, reflecting the culture, the values, the religion, the political and social structure, and even the environmental situation in that country. Drawing on local expertise, we'll identify the changes needed to encourage sustainable growth and poverty eradication, not coming with preconceived notions of what we are going to be doing, but targeting interventions on institutions and individuals who drive or impede positive change. And finally, Administrator Power has made it clear that we at AID are to be global public advocates for this approach. We will serve as a thought leader, a learning leader, an action leader, but we will humbly use our convening authority, our partnership capability, and our power of example to urge other donors, international NGOs, for-profit contractors, international organizations, and other US government agencies to adopt the localization approach. And we'll apply this not only to our normal development work, but to our most pressing challenges, including COVID, climate change, irregular migration, other population displacement, democracy and promotion of human rights, and in particular, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I want to repeat what I said before, that these strategies are intentionally designed to empower vulnerable groups, children, adolescents, women, the LGBT population, people with disabilities, racial and religious minorities, to create and lead approaches to ensure their own growth and safety. You know, we've had mixed results in this effort in the past, and even looking forward, localization is going to test our adaptability and our capacity for change in policies, in practices, in culture, and in laws. It also raises questions about our risk posture, delays in disbursement and burgeoning pipelines, the proper role for our implementing partners in the NGO and development community, and the need for greater staff trained in new skills. But most importantly, it relies upon our ability to continue to access the input, the advocacy, and the encouragement of you, our local partners, who are going to be driving this exercise forward with us. So that's my perception, and the administrator again today was very, very strong in her Georgetown presentation on the need for this approach.
Don, that's very exciting, and I look forward to working with you, the administrator, and our colleagues in global health to advance that agenda. And you mentioned the critical role of the partners on the line here. So it's a great segue to my next question for Shambi. Mothers to Mothers has in fact worked with USAID for over a decade as a prime implementing partner across Southern Africa, but you started as a sub-awardee long before that. Could you tell us a little bit more about that transition from sub-awardee to prime partner, and now where you are in your 20th year as an institution? Be also curious to learn, for all our sakes, what will be the key things M2M is looking to do in terms of the evolution of that relationship, especially in light of what Don just said about USAID's localization agenda. Over to you, Shambi.
Great, thank you so much, Raj. And just to really say thank you to Kim and sort of Don for acknowledging the historical past and the hard truths that come as a result of the funding streams, and also what it means, especially for Africa and other continents that have had to go through some of the inequities that we still continue to face that make it difficult for us to program. I think it's quite humbling to be able to at least acknowledge that's part and parcel of the things that we need to look at as we look at the future of aid. Thank you so much. 20 years, 2001, we started out in Cape Town. We now work across 10 African countries, and it has not been an easy feat. We operate locally in those countries, and we serve over 1 million clients a year. Our partnership with USAID started a couple of years back. We started as a sub in 2005 on an award, and then we were able to receive direct funding on the New Partners Initiative from 2006. And USAID is definitely part of our success story. We wouldn't have been able to move into these 10 African countries and do what we do without the funding that we receive from USAID. And as a new partner, I will say it was tough. There's something to be said about going from a small organization and receiving couple of thousands in funding for a year and then going into the millions, and maybe not necessarily being ready to receive that kind of funding because of sort of the stringent requirements around grants and contracts, around sort of HR, around governance, around systems, and really getting your organization prepped for that. And recipient and also definitely in there with NPI, where we really needed to reassess our entire organizational capacity as M2M. And capacity building was provided, but we had to go back and look at our organization and say, are we ready to be able to be a prime recipient of this funding? And what kind of support do we need from USAID, as well as the technical partners providing capacity building, to be able to leverage this funding so we get to the countries where we are now? As a recipient of USAID funding, what we did is that besides the capacity building that we received around sort of the organizational systems, the MME, the grants, we ended up actually becoming a capacity builder ourselves through this direct funding, because we were able to build the organization and grow it to a place where now we could provide that technical assistance, and we became a mature organization, having moved from a nascent one. This allowed us to expand our model into Kenya, Zambia, and also South Africa, and integrate it into the national model and ensure that we're embedded within the PMTCT framework, and we're ensuring for those high-level outcomes at the national level in these countries. And what we did is that we then extended this simple model and scaled it in other countries. And it's as a result of the leverage of NPI that we were able to move into other countries such as Angola and Tanzania, where we're still working today. There was a concerted effort. I like to say you could smell the transformation in the air with NPI. There was a sense that all the partners, from the donor to the international partners, to the local partners, to the ministries, are all working together in a concerted effort to make sure everybody wins. Because at the end of the day, we wanted to see more and more partners transition into direct funding. You could sense it in the NPI meetings when the partners met. You could sense it in the way capacity building was provided. You could sense it in the way USAID provided support to ensure that there was success for those partners. And then you could sense that at the end of the day, we all wanted to have this success because transition of local partners is possible. And it is doable, and it has been done. And there are local partners now, M2M being one of them, that are as a result of the strategies that USAID has had over the number of years, from USAID Forward and on, that we can say this is a result of the investment. It's an investment that's made when we do say we want to localize this kind of work. So really, as a key partner, and a recipient of this kind of aid that was strategic, that was intentional, that was forward thinking, we hope to continue to be a regional partner where we see ourselves working in the regional space and providing that TA. already opened that up. We've opened it up in Angola, we've opened it up in Tanzania, we've done it in the Kenya, and we hope to see ourselves doing more of that. But the question always remains is that as you grow and you become bigger and better as a result of such funding and concerted effort, often sometimes you can now be sort of not be included in funding rounds because you're seen to be too big and not necessarily a local partner, as we'd envision a local partner to be. So really understand that the growth towards regional and this expansion does not necessarily say you no longer function as a local partner. We still function locally in these countries we operate in, and we still want to be able to do that work. So how do we still, with that regional remit, still operate locally and continue the work that we're doing? The question that I really have that I thought was critical for the partners that are receiving this aid, are you ready? Are you ready to have the appetite for this aid? Are you ready for the change management that's required to be able to integrate this funding? Are you ready to go from a couple of thousands to a couple of millions? And what are you going to do to get your organization ready so it can receive this kind of funding? So we're incredibly grateful to USAID and the journey we've had with it. Thank you, Raj.
No, great summary there of just, are you ready? And I think that is a key question. Let me ask you a follow-up question. So, you know, every one of the organizations that are out there say, yes, I am ready, maybe thinking about, or perhaps they already are a direct partner, like M2M has become, or a prime partner. How do you diversify funding for the long term? Now, Mothers to Mothers has managed to do that. You're not just funded by USAID, of course. You have worked with other funders, the private sector. To Don's earlier point, you've worked with governments and also received some funding from their corporate sponsors. You even have celebrity patrons and high-level ambassadors of Mothers to Mothers. That's a very unique sustainability and funding strategy. What tips do you have for other partners here who want to diversify their funding base, not only with adding or if they have USAID funds growing from it, but mobilizing other forms of sustainable financing? What tips do you have?
Well, the first one, and as we'd say in the USAID world, results. So deliver beyond the expectations of the funder. Through our funding with USAID, it allowed us to really look at a diverse funding portfolio, as you said, Raj. And really, you need to be able to deliver so that you can show the impact that you're having. Data is a big part of this, your M&E systems, to be able to share your outcomes and your impacts in a clear and meaningful way. Within the private sector, you have to get even a little bit more sophisticated because, you know, they want things in sound bites. It should be short, sweet. You should be able to show your successes. And we've been able to do that and evolve over the years to be able to position ourselves in both spaces. You know, so using data strategically is going to be critical for any partner. I think for us also, just having a robust resource mobilization strategy and engagement of networks, donors, partners, targeting specific donors within sort of the restricted and unrestricted space, and also investing time and energy just in research so that we can move beyond just a brand and sponsorship towards long-term funding. And then how do you tell that story? Who's telling your story? Our clients have to tell our stories. If you're not able to go back to your clients and have them tell stories around their journey through the services that you provided and how it has changed their lives, then are you really doing what you need to do? Your clients need to be able to provide those success stories so that we can really see the impact of your work. We have the privilege of working with our mentor mothers who are also previous clients. They've gone through the journey. So they speak from the perspective of being a previous client, but now they're speaking as having meaningful work, being a frontline worker, contributing to their community. And we have them as spokesperson as international events. And it's not just to have them there, it's because nobody else can tell the story better I can't as Shambi. They can, because they live it and see it every single day. And it's through their skills and expertise that we even sit at these forums and can talk about our work. So definitely, who's telling your story? Those international patrons, they tell our story to different audiences. So being able to understand who can tell your story, where, how, and how well. So those are some of the quick tidbits that we give to other organizations. Thanks, Raj.
You heard it here, folks. Very practical tips there from lived experience and expertise, Shambi. Thank you for that. Let me turn to Kim. Your organization, Global Fund for Children, is not a USAID partner. Your organization is actually part of something called the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, whereby philanthropic organizations like yours commit to an approach that starts with trust, tries to balance power dynamics between grantees and funders, and then reduces the reporting burdens on grantees. And that's amongst several other kinds of shifts in the way you, partnership shifts that you're trying to drive. So I wanted to ask you, although it's quite different for USAID when we're working with US taxpayer dollars, what are the lessons that USAID needs to take on from this trust-based approach that you've been involved in?
Right. So, while it may seem different when starting with taxpayer dollars, I guess the first thing I'll comment is I don't think it's as different as we think. And I might even dare to say that sometimes we hide behind it's taxpayer money when it's convenient. And yet, I don't believe we always practice the same kind of intrusive control with taxpayer money when it comes to other areas of spending. Defense, some private sector contracts, we approach it differently. And we really need to completely kind of rethink risk when we look at this idea of our taxpayers don't want us to be messing around with our money. They want an assurance. But, we obsess over our fears of misappropriated funds and we completely ignore the scale of damage that our inaction can cause, right? And so, it seems to me that a lot of that is because we just can't seem to muster enough trust in others to let go and stop micromanaging. And the private sector and management theory long ago established that trust is the glue that actually allows the free market economy to produce economic development, to produce innovation. And so, considering the relative size of international aid within the US government budget, I am sure we can find a way to push a little more of that tiny percentage of taxpayer money into trust-based relationships that our entire economic history proves actually produces really stunning results. So to actually answer your question now, let me share a bit about the approach that the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project has become best known for. It starts with 6 basic practices, at least that's what has gained a lot of kind of awareness. Though if I have time, I'll zoom out a little bit more and talk about the really important part, which is the values. But of these 6 practices, I think the first and most commonly referred to is to give multi-year unrestricted funding. Most nonprofits the work of nonprofits, is long-term, it's unpredictable. So multi-year unrestricted funding actually gives grantees the flexibility to assess and determine where their grant dollars are most needed, allows for innovation, allows for emergent action, for sustainability. And that's really what's important in this complex and moving world that we live in. I think USAID understands the need for the multi-year funding partnerships, perhaps even more than other donors, which is really great. But that also doesn't always filter down to local partners when you're working through intermediaries. So I think that's something to be aware of. And I think that most of our local partners would say that the unrestricted nature of funding is potentially more important than perhaps the guarantee of that upfront multi-year support. And I think USAID could definitely question more what it's actually gaining by exerting so much control over local partners' budget management. So the second practice is one that we call do the homework, which is, for trust-based philanthropists to move the onus of the work around getting a grant together onto the funder itself, in terms of the work that it requires to get to know prospective grantees and really think carefully about the time that we're demanding of nonprofits in the early stages of vetting processes, and recognizing that there's a lot of time wasted in the pursuit, right? And so, that doesn't mean that grant makers should do all of the homework in designing up project. It refers to the homework of building the relationship. I think USAID has been known to do some of this, but often it doesn't seem positively, or we kind of end up getting the worst of both worlds. For example, when can things that we could call wired solicitations, where you kind of secretly know who it might be directed towards because a lot of relationship has been built already, when can we just make that non-competed? Instead of creating a situation where a bunch of other organizations are going to spend a lot of their resources attempting to get these funds, and at the end of the day, we're just creating unnecessary competition when there's a relationship there. And other places, the competition is the right way to go, and it can be truly open and transparent. But you can still work on making the homework that we ask of partners in those wide competitions as minimal as possible, so that we're not diverting them from the primary purpose of their existence, which is helping people actually on the ground. The third one is to simplify and streamline paperwork. Nonprofits spend an inordinate amount of time on funder-driven applications and reports, and that absolutely distracts them from mission-critical work. I'm not going to put these words in Shombi's mouth, but I love when she mentioned about, are you ready for this? Are you ready for this taking on of potentially millions of dollars from the US government? The concerns that she brought up were not exactly the general concerns of like rapid growth, but they were actually about, can we actually administer this money with the requirements that USAID puts on us? I think that's something we need to look at and go, it's not that they're worried about growing with lots of money, it's that they're worried about relating with us. Like they're actually worried about, can I handle this relationship with USAID? So there are plenty of things that we can change, and instead of focusing only on building the capacity of local organizations to deal with us the way we are, what can we change about how we approach those partners so that they don't have to shift as much, that in fact we can allow them to stay who they are doing the amazing work that they're doing, because that's why we want to partner with them in the first place, instead of kind of changing them into our image. Next, sorry, Raj, go ahead.
No, please, no, I thought you were finished, but why don't you finish your last point? I'll jump in after that, yeah.
Sure, I'll go quickly through them. The last three in this list are just to be transparent and responsive. And I think that, I see a lot of that in USAID, but it really comes down to the individual staff members. I think a lot of local partners will say that it all comes down to who your, and I don't know if the acronyms have changed, but who your agreement officer representative or your contract officer technical representative are at the end of the day. So how are we encouraging those staff to really hone those skills? And I think Don spoke to this as well, of relationships, of communication, of transparency. And are we empowering them to be transparent and to spend the time building relationships and to really listen and take in and actually adjust how they work based on what they're hearing from partners? So it's a two-way relationship. And then the last two are to solicit and act on feedback. I hope that some of this meeting involves some of that, hearing from your local partners and actually acting based on that feedback. And the last one is to offer support beyond the check. And I think that USAID has done some really good acknowledgement of the need to invest in capacity development. But also I really think it's important that USAID consider that right now a lot of the capacity development continues to be about training up partners to be able to deal with USAID. And that doesn't necessarily mean organizational sustainability. It doesn't help necessarily with diversifying funding. And it really can again, it just focuses a lot on that administration of the money versus the fact that organizational capacity is so much broader than that. It's, as Shombi mentions, it's the ability to tell the story, to inspire people. It's actually keeping that close connection with community, even as you grow bigger. There's so many other pieces to capacity that I think that partners would benefit from support from others in that and need that as they grow. But there's a really narrow focus, I think, still around capacity development.
Could you speak? I mean, those 6 ideas are really resonant. I've seen, I worked quite a bit before coming to government with philanthropists, and you could almost find an analogy for every one of the 6 practices, if not the exact practice, amongst some of the most effective philanthropists. Lower the burden on the doer, but the burden on the funder. For example, on your point on diligence, I thought very insightful about multi-year partnerships. Is that happening at the local level, and enabling staff in an agency like USAID to be incentivized and encouraged to build trusting relationships, right? I think my sense is part of that. More of us know executives, say, in international NGOs than we do local NGOs, and part of that's a function of whether or not we're encouraged, incentivized, and have the bandwidth, as Don pointed out, the staffing to be able to build those relationships in an earnest way. Can you talk about accountability? I understand you have some non-traditional ideas about accountability, and that may be quite different to what a lot of people think about when they hear that term, accountability in relationship to funding. Could you tell us a bit more about that, Kim?
Sure, and I recognize that some of these ideas are going to require a lot of intermediate ideas to bridge them to what is possible within the realm of U.S. government agencies and administrations. But I think for me and for all of us, accountability matters for sure. But donors are not the appropriate keepers of it, in a sense. The people who will experience the most harm if things go wrong are the people that aid is reaching or failing to reach. They are the ones that we are accountable to, and we are really failing miserably at creating the appropriate power dynamics and transparencies to allow for accountability to really flow in that direction. And this shows up in a number of different concepts that I think we've kind of distorted or misused even to preserve that control on status quo. So some examples, for example, in some cases, conflict of interest is not a really helpful term when we're talking about social change. The closer people are to the issues, the less disinterested they are, the more powerful the engagement. That's actually exactly the ownership that we want and we should support. This isn't a business world with financial interests at stake when we're talking about social change. These social movements for change where we depend on people actually weaving networks of trust and connection and collaboration for their collective well-being, for their advancement, for their justice. I really think we have to be aware that those are integrated interdependencies and very much disinterested. The people who this is going to affect the most should be the ones at the table, and conflict of interest can't be the risk issue that gets in the way. We lose out on so much. Just to mention another one, I think things like budgets are guesstimates. We have to recognize that we've focused way too much on them as like this is the detailed plan that will hold forever and ever. Overhead keeps organizations alive. If you're refusing to pay overhead, you're basically saying the organization's existence is not valuable to me. If you're restricting how much overhead they can have in the budget, you're devaluing the sustainability, and you're kind of forcing this creative budgeting and expense administration that just drains time and energy, because organizations have to find a way to cover their costs one way or another, and it just forces them to do really creative math. And things like the way we think about accounting. Accounting is as variable as the economic systems and contexts where people have to manage money. So receipts mean different things different places. And at the end of the day, if you don't think an organization is going to spend their money carefully, no amount of checking receipts is going to change that. If that trust isn't there to begin with, that's as far as we're going to be able to get. So I have plenty more I could say about it, but I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Kim. Now, I think this point about the power of proximity, if we want to truly invest in the people closest to those we serve, what can we do to empower those closest to those we serve to ensure that the investments actually make a difference? And so thank you for those points. I want to close with a final question to all three of you. Maybe you could each take about 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes to respond. We've spent all our time this morning, afternoon, evening, speaking about inequities in local partner and the way funding is distributed, especially to local partners versus others. What about the other inequities, right? So what could the future of aid do to address inequities in terms of gender or race and other barriers to equitable access and decision-making for health services or for development in general across the board? I'm curious just any parting words on what we can do as we chart a new path for aid in terms of addressing those inequities and power imbalances. And feel free to, whoever wants to jump in first.
Go ahead, Don.
I was just going to offer a couple of thoughts there. We have to be intentional in this effort. We have to put a recognition that you cannot achieve, poverty eradication, for example, or any of the SDGs, unless you identify the pockets of populations that are most affected. And we all know that those are marginalized populations. They are women, they are people with disabilities, they are the LGBT community, they're displaced people. Under the first Obama administration, we implemented a series of programs where we actually had diversity impact statements for our major projects. All of our major projects in particular had to analyze how they were impacting women and issues of gender. And without doing those statements, the projects would not be approved. That's one practical way. We also have to look at disaggregated data. We can't assume that a rising tide raises all boats. It simply isn't true. And so we have to analyze, is this project actually empowering women? Is it empowering people with disabilities? And we have to measure that without time-bound, measurable goals, with feedback loops and accountability provisions. All of our words are just idle hopes for the future. We also have to look at the incentive structure for our staff. We have to prioritize the achievement of these efforts. It was interesting. I was in a panel the other morning with a woman who was a colonel in the US Army, and we were talking about gender, and she had all of those incredible bars and stripes on her about all the awards that she had won. And I asked her, how many of those awards have anything to do with women's empowerment? And she sheepishly said none. And I said, well, then how can you say that the Defense Department prioritizes women's empowerment if they don't offer incentives to their people to pursue these agendas? I also just wanted to make a quick comment on a couple of Kim's points, all of which I firmly agree with, most of which we are acting on, but I really appreciated the wide range of them. You asked originally, Raj, why I'm hopeful. Well, in part, it's because of the leadership of our agency. We have, as one of our deputies, Paloma Adams-Allen, who previously worked as the head of the Inter-American Foundation, which is a model of trust-based philanthropy. Our newly confirmed deputy administrator, Isabel Coleman, used to be chair of the board of Give Directly, an organization that follows these principles in East Africa. Michelle Samilis, who's the head of our Policy Planning and Learning Bureau, ran Bread for the World, which adopts this exact approach. And frankly, I am currently even executive director of Mobilizing Men as Partners for Women, Peace, and Security. And one of the things we do in 20 countries around the world is provide awards, cash awards to local actors, not grants, not contracts. They do not need to apply for these. They can use them however they believe is appropriate, as long as there's no diversion of resources. One of the organizations we're supporting in Uganda has as its official mailing address the fourth building down from the Esso station on the corner of these two streets. And we've got to get to the point where USAID is not scared of going with support for an organization that has that kind of address.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. Those are really powerful words. Let me turn over to you, Shambi, in 3 minutes or so, and then we'll go over to Kim before we close out.
Oh, great, thank you. Thinking about this question is always difficult to know how to respond to it. looking at sort of the inequities that exist and looking at the power balances just from the historical context, and how far we need to go, and the fact that, you know, we're moving the dial, but there's so much more work that we need to do to contribute to reducing those inequities. So to be able to place it in a context where you can say we're actually tackling what exists is so difficult, because there's so much, and especially when you get onto the ground and you work in these communities and you just see what needs to happen. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I hope that through the work that we do and the continued funding and support that we receive and the partnerships that we develop, that there's a concerted effort to really look at challenging these global inequities, looking at the power imbalances, being able to provide equity in the way in which we develop and design and implement programs, and having our people and communities at the heart of what we do. I think maybe first off is to say, we can do it as local partners. When we talk about localization, there are more than enough partners on the ground that have the skills, that have the capacity, that have the commitment, that have the drive, that can do this work. I think the critical thing is being given the chance and being given the support to be able to prove yourself, and tapping into the wealth of resources that exist. For us, at a very, very simple level, we try and tackle these inequities by being very strategic and intentional in the way in which we work with women. We've talked about our model and how it's centered in the communities, and we work with women as frontline workers. And there's a quote that I hear, that I've heard, that says, when you educate a woman, you educate a nation. And there's something to be said about the power of a woman and the ability for her to move mountains when you give her access, resources, support, you give her passion, you give her fire. She can do so many things. So we believe by working closely with these women and not necessarily having to empower them, because that empowerment comes within. They already have that fire within them. All you're doing is just reigniting it. You are providing the training, you are providing the support, you're providing the meaningful work, you're providing a story where they can talk about how they've changed the health outcomes of their community members. And therefore they can be proud of their work. And when they go home, they talk to their children and say, this is what I'm doing. They can be proud of the fact that when the COVID vaccinations were prioritized, they were called as frontline workers. They were able to still commute during the lockdown because they were recognized by governments as critical members of our health systems. And I think that's the transformational work that we try and do at a very simple level. And I say simple just because, like I said, the issues around inequities in the past are so huge. We're intentional in our leadership in our countries. So out of our 10 countries, 8 of those are led by women, and it's intentional. We want women to be leading our programs and providing that skill and dedication, so that we can help move that dial just a little bit. So it's depending on what these women bring to the table and that immense skill that allows us to say we can do the work that we do. So in closing, I think still a lot of work around reducing stigma, around gender equity, around the power imbalances. But just thank you for an opportunity to be able to share the work that we do to be able to change and impact the marginalized communities that we're working in Africa.
You left us with such an important message there, Shambi, about being intentional and that these things don't just happen. You don't change inequities. Thank you for that as well. Kim, to you for the final word.
And I guess I'll just say that social change for justice and equality is always about power. It is always political. And there are activists around the world that are putting their physical safety on the line, not to mention their health, their mental well-being, and their livelihoods for this equality, for pushing against abuses of power. They're speaking up, they're challenging inequality. So those of us who are not under physical threat can definitely take bolder action. USAID can be part of social change. I think it's important for USAID to recognize its rightful role. It's not about USAID going in to lobby for political change around the world. nor is it about USAID defining the agenda for local civil society to advocate for change. USAID can amplify voices of advocates who are setting their own agendas. It can fund activists and the ecosystem that works to protect and support them. It can join the chorus or the orchestra with its own voice, but it's not the soloist or the conductor.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Don, and thank you, Shambi, for the conversation today. The quintessential question I'm coming away with is how can global health go local on health? And I think you have given us a lot of not only inspiration and practical examples and tips, but also I think challenged us, right? As Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights activist in the U.S., would say that the change comes from creative tension. So I think you've created some tension that I think hopefully we'll have to work to resolve. And with that, I think right on cue here, let me thank our host, Dr. Clint Cavanaugh, Director of the Office of HIV and AIDS, a friend who has brought us all together this week, and to the team of organizations. None of this work ever happens without a team, and often I'm sure in this case has happened with a team of teams. So thanks to all of those on the OHA local partner team for this year's events. Let me hand it over to you, Clint, to round out the week with some closing remarks.
Thanks so much, Raj. Like you, I just want to really thank this thoughtful panel and discussion. Shambi, I've been jotting down notes. You've been so inspiring and have continued to learn from this session, but really throughout the week. As this is the conclusion of the joint USAID local partner portion of the meeting, I really just want to take a moment to thank the over 630 participants that we've had from over 150 local partner organizations that have joined us this year. I also want to thank the nearly 500 USG staff that have joined from headquarters and our mission teams. I think it's reflective of the commitment and the investment that our agency is making around the localization agenda. And I'm so proud of the work that we've been doing in the PEPFAR space that is really helping to inform the broader work that's happening at an agency level. And on that point, I really want to thank Don and Raj, who have truly been champions of this work and really driving an agenda on this at the agency level. This gathering has been so important. Many of you who were with us the first year recognize that we really kind of got to brass tacks on how do we move the dial in this space, and got to an almost work planning approach. And I think in many ways, this meeting has been a critical reason as to why we've achieved so much success in such a short period of time of the last few years. We value the chance to hear from you directly on real-time challenges in our programs and how we can work together to develop solutions that address operational and technical challenges to improve health outcomes for all the people that we serve. I want to assure you that moving forward, OHA, from my standpoint, is committed to continuing to expand meaningful opportunities to engage with you, our local partners. We also want to move into sustained epidemic control, acknowledging that you will be playing a cornerstone role in that work. And in doing so, the way in which we engage with you, just as the model of transitioning into sustained epidemic control, both need to evolve. So we need to learn from you. And while PEPFAR can be quite top-down in its approach, sustained epidemic control will require us to work quite differently. So just like we've done throughout the week, we will continue to learn from you, but help have that inform the way we collectively work together to sustain our investment in the global HIV response. We want to achieve and sustain control, and the full range of HIV prevention and treatment services must be owned and operated by local institutions, governments, and community-based and community-led organizations. And that is why USAID has prioritized and made significant progress in this work. Why we have prioritized, and particularly the investment in local partnerships. Our intent is to transition to local partners really the responsibility around the delivery of direct HIV services, and establish sufficient capacity, capability, and durability of our PEPFAR partners to really be aligned to long-term impact and sustainable local solutions. We've seen really achievements in the last year that have been astounding that you, our local partners, have made despite the challenges of the pandemic. Just a few minutes ago, and I think Don and Raj referred to this, our administrator, Samantha Power, gave a speech outlining a new vision for international development. In it, she committed to 1/4 of all USAID funding to be awarded to local organizations by the end of the next 4 years, and 50% of all programming to be local, partner-led, designed, and implemented by the end of the decade, with oversight by community organizations to hold us collectively accountable. That is huge. And really, you heard from her in her Q&A the priority that she is placing on this within her tenure. She outlined 3 key reform areas. The first being broadening our coalition to make USAID more inclusive. And you've heard elements of that on this within this discussion. She is shifting practices to allow for more voices at the table, making USAID more equitable. And lastly, wants to prioritize listening to what our partners are asking of us in order to help us be more responsive to their needs. She has announced the creation of a workwithusaid.org hub, a brand new resource hub designed to make implementation for new, current, and local partners much more straightforward. And yesterday at our Q&A event, the administrator referenced USAID PEPFAR's local partner transition as a proof of concept for the agency to inform her agenda. And while USAID only directs close to currently 6% of funding to local institutions, USAID PEPFAR programs are really out front on this effort. And we project, we currently have 57% of our funding to local institutions, but we will be at nearly 65% next year. We value you, and we recognize that you are critical to maintaining our global HIV response. I could not be more proud of this outstanding work that our USAID PEPFAR local partners are achieving to make this proof of concept successful. And I really want to acknowledge the points that Shombi made related to the attention needs to be paid on results, measurement, performance, and building regional capacity. Shombi, just from a personal standpoint, when I was in South Africa, I had the luck when I joined the Foreign Service of being assigned to South Africa in my first tour, and immediately recognized the talent we had in that country. And as I moved throughout the subcontinent, further recognized the talent we had across the board. When I went to Haiti, I routinely would say, I wish I could tap into this partner and M to M to help with local talent in that country, in that context, in the case of Haiti. When I came to USAID Washington, I then had the opportunity to create a new project, and I put together EQUIP, which was our first central award comprised solely of African-based institutions. I can tell you in the first year, they were operating in 17 countries, including Ukraine, Burma, and Haiti. So when we speak to the importance of local institutions in response to the local context, I can tell you the innovations that you spoke to, in light of COVID and the need to shift to digital solutions. You are the innovators that we need to tap to solve challenges across the globe. And the importance of positioning our local partners to serve regional roles, I couldn't agree, is critical. So I just wanted to highlight that point, because as you spoke to that, I thought, couldn't agree more. I was so impressed with the innovations that were shared during the panel over the last 3 days, including hearing how effective U equals U messaging and psychosocial support can be for clients who have traditionally had a hard time with viral load suppression, supporting KP clients and clients with substance abuse issues. We also learned how collaboration with local governments can facilitate scale up of critical priorities like TLD as a first line regimen to treat HIV. In a session focusing on the role of social and behavioral change, we heard from Panos in Haiti, Timor in Tanzania, and Wedi in Mozambique on how they use client insights to better inform interventions. We've heard about collecting data to understand what our populations of interest know and believe, and how they feel is the very foundation of patient-centered care approaches. We heard innovations into centralized drug distribution. Examples like the VIP card that the Institut pour la Santé in Haiti is using to allow patient mobility while tracking clients from pickup point to pickup point. We heard from Baylor, Malawi, who shared innovative techniques to inform the future of HIV testing services by leveraging surge testing and targeting at high-risk populations. And finally, in this morning's GBV session, we heard about the importance of engaging communities for mobilization to address GBV and gender equality, the provision of first-line support when identifying and responding to survivors, and effective ways to connect survivors with timely post-GBV services to increase PEP uptake and completion. These are just some of the many highlights and insights shared by local partners over the last 3 days. In addition to the programmatic innovation shared during the panel this week, what our USAID partners have collectively achieved in the last year has truly been tremendous. I can tell you at headquarters, we track quarterly the performance of our local partners against international partners. And some of the programmatic highlights are stark. Our local partners, again, from an agency standpoint, through PEPFAR funding, support 58% of our agency's clients on HIV treatment globally. You support 40% of the scale up of multi-month dispensing, putting new clients on treatment despite the challenges of COVID. You are supporting 48% of our case finding results, 45% of the services related to initiating clients on TB preventative therapy. You're supporting 41% of our OVC clients, serving 154,000 orphans and children in the last year. And you added 193,000 people on PrEP in the last year alone. Huge accomplishments, but even more impressive given the context of our total portfolio. We heard from you and we are responding. As the administrator acknowledged, USAID is not especially easy to work with. We appreciate the feedback that you have provided on how we can improve our partnership with you throughout this meeting. We take it seriously. I know Raj and Dawn take it seriously, and she takes it seriously. And the feedback provided during each of these country listening sessions, the CEO town hall and the local partner panels will make its way up the chain to really ensure that we are taking this and identify institutional solutions. I want you to know that we are listening to your feedback. This, again, will be shared at the highest levels of the agency. We hope to report back to you at the meeting next year, and in engagements in between about how we are moving the needle on unblocking some of these hurdles. And we really want to ensure that that feedback loop is ongoing. For example, some of the things we heard. Number one, local organizations are concerned about sustainability. We want you to know that work to build the capacity of our local partners to be successful and to compete for diverse funding opportunities remains a priority. From a PEPFAR standpoint, success for me to see is that you flourish well beyond the HIV response. Number two, we heard cash liquidity can affect program implementation. We recognize liquidity as a real operating challenge for local organizations and are working to address this and improve the disbursement of funds. We heard number three, that your continued capacity support is important and needing to look at ways in which we can triangulate capacity building support to you. We're working with our financial management, around our reporting support and compliance on USG rules and regulations to make sure that you have the support you need. We also want to encourage partner collaboration, communication, facilitate south-to-south sharing amongst local partners, and we'll be setting up fora to ensure that that happens. Lastly, we heard that local partners appreciate engagement with USAID leadership. Following our CEO town hall yesterday, we're working with our OAA and FM colleagues to develop FAQs that can be regularly shared with local organizations. We're exploring regular exchanges between local organizations and USAID Washington staff, including our financial office and Office of Acquisition. And each of your local USAID mission offices were participating throughout the week, and they heard your feedback, and they will be going back to their teams and making sure that your requests receive follow-up as well. So in conclusion, just want to say collaborating with local actors to address local priorities across the globe remains a fundamental priority for USAID and for our agency working within PEPFAR. Local partners are not only key to USAID PEPFAR success, but again, are key to broader agency and country systems for long-term sustainability. I want to thank all of you and our USAID staff for everything you do to support this agenda. Thank you to our local partners for being part of the USAID family and the tireless work you do day in and day out to fight HIV despite the many other challenges you and your teams are facing. And lastly, I just really want to thank IntraHealth and the ASAP management team for helping stand up this meeting. Closer to home, I really want to thank my OHA local partner team. They are stellar. I cannot sing their praises more widely. Callie Rolfs Wong leads that team. She's phenomenal, along with Courtney Irwin, Catherine, Lindsay, Debbie, and the rest of the team. And just a reminder that today is the last day of the joint meeting, but the local partners will have programming space tomorrow without USAID staff. So with that, we hope to see you next year. Really, again, want to thank all of you for your participation, your thoughtful discourse this week. And again, looking forward to the continued dialogue. Thanks so much.